All the Young Dudes. Sirius's Perspective by Rollercoaster Words. Chapter 144. 7th Year. Choices. You fucking bastard! Oi! Sirius stood immediately, hands curling into fists. It's okay, Remus said weakly, although Sirius wasn't entirely sure which one of them he was talking to. Marlene was sobbing now, shoulders shaking even as she glared. Bastard! She scowled, scrubbing at the tears on her cheeks. Miss McKinnon! Madame Pomfrey bustled over, shocked. I'll have you escorted out if you cannot at least be civil. And you! Marlene rounded on her. You said you didn't know anything about it. You said you'd never even worked with one before. How did she find out? Sirius wondered, horrified. Who the fuck told her? Don't blame her, Marlene, please. Remus stumbled back onto the bed, sitting down heavily. She's only trying to protect me. How long? Marlene whirled around, glaring furiously. Since I was 5. Bastard! Marlene, please. She threw a crumpled piece of parchment down on the mattress, covered in crammed handwriting. A letter. Remus's fingers trembled as he picked it up, unfolding it and squinting down at the words. Marlene stood, arms folded, cheeks still tear-stained, watching as he struggled to read. Sorry, Remus said after a moment. Sorry, I've got a headache. What does it, Sirius was there immediately, stepping in front of Marlene to provide a barrier as he plucked the letter from Remus's shaking hands. He scanned it quickly, brow furrowing as he read. It's from Danny McKinnon. Sirius thought of the envelope Remus had handed him the previous afternoon. But hadn't that letter been anonymous? Bloody hell, Mooney, what have you done? Please, just tell me what it says. Remus croaked, dropping his head into his hands. Sirius had to resist the urge to sit down next to him, to pull him into his arms and tell Marlene to fuck off. She was still waiting, impatiently looming over the bed. Madame Pomfrey hovered not far behind her. Sirius cleared his throat, reading quickly. He says, thank you. What? Remus's head jerked up. Well, that's the gist, Sirius continued, frowning as he read the last few paragraphs. He received a letter when he arrived home this morning from one of Marlene's friends, who claims to be a werewolf. It had a lot of useful advice, and he'd like to meet with you. He says he won't tell anybody, and he has no idea who you are anyway. But I do, Marlene said, no longer sobbing, but still just as angry. Yes, Remus said quietly, looking down at the bed. I knew you'd work it out. Marlene blinked. And you sent the letter anyway? I wanted to help. You idiot, Sirius thought, staring at him. You beautiful, brilliant idiot. Marlene was staring too, an incomprehensible expression on her face. Dumbledore knows. And McGonagall? She asked finally, no longer shouting. Yes. It's so dangerous. Her voice had dropped to a whisper. You could have killed someone. Sirius bristled, turning to her. No, he said firmly. It's all been perfectly safe, ever since first year, hasn't it, Poppy? Remus would never hurt anybody. Remus wouldn't, Marlene said steadily. But the wolf might. Sirius blinked, thinking of the scars on his chest. I haven't. Not ever, Remus said, voice pleading. We've done everything possible. Marlene scoffed. Are you registered? Well, almost everything possible. And you just wanted to help Danny. You weren't trying to, I don't know, get him on side. Sirius could contain the burst of anger that erupted at that. What side are you talking about, McKinnon? He demanded, stepping out towards her without thinking. Mooney's on our side. He's your friend. But Marlene didn't back down. She straightened, glaring straight back at Sirius, looking him dead in the eye. I thought he was. she said coolly. Beside him, Remus deflated. I had to keep it a secret, Marlene, he said in a horrible, guilty voice. I had to. Otherwise, I could never have come back to Hogwarts at all. You know what it's like when there's something different about you. You know what people are like. Marlene blanched, staring at him as if he'd just slapped her. How dare you? She breathed, mouth twisting into a snarl. How dare you? No, I didn't mean... Remus reached out, trying to placate her, but she refused to listen. Stay away from my family, she spit, spinning around and storming out of the hospital wing without a single look backwards. Sirius watched her go, buzzing with fury. How dare she? How dare Marlene act as though Remus had done something wrong, had offended her, just for having an incurable bloody disease? And when all he'd done was try to help her brother. Sirius had half a mind to follow Marlene, try to knock some sense into her. But there were more important things to worry about. He turned back to Remus, who had collapsed back onto the pillows the moment Marlene was out of sight, features strained. I'm okay, he said weakly. Honestly, just gonna have a little rest. I'm going to speak to Professor McGonagall at once, Madame Pomfrey assured him. I think, Remus mumbled, eyes sliding shut, you might be better off talking to Marlene once she's calmed down. She respects your opinion. Don't get her into trouble. She hasn't done anything wrong. Sirius scowled, but refrained from speaking until Madame Pomfrey had retreated back to her office. Hasn't done anything wrong, he repeated once they were alone. She's being a bigoted little cow. It's not an uncommon point of view, Remus said, stifling a yawn. Might as well get used to it sometimes. I ought to go and... No. Remus gave him a hard look. Leave her alone. But she's going to talk to her friends first, Remus insisted. Lily and Mary. I'd rather she talk to them. They're the best people in this situation. The last word was half swallowed with a yawn. Bloody hell, Moony, Sirius frowned. How can you be so calm? I'm knackered, Remus mumbled, nestling further into the pillows. Within minutes, he had fallen asleep. Moony might have been able to relax, but Sirius was still buzzing with adrenaline, stifling the urge to run after Marlene and shake her until she saw sense. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't keep still, fidgeting in his chair and staring out at the boy sleeping peacefully in front of him. Remus's chest rose and fell under the thin hospital blanket steadily. Things had been going so well. Well, not everything. The headlines of the Daily Prophet got worse every day, the Slytherins nastier, the adults more secretive and worried. Remus was still withdrawn, sometimes angry at others. They still argued, especially close to the moons. But ever since their blowout, that day when Remus first went to see his mum, they hadn't really fought. Things had been getting better. They'd both opened up a bit more about their families, their feelings, their scars. Things had been good. I won't let her ruin it, Sirius thought, watching the sunlight stream through the window and dance over Moony's curls. I won't let her hurt you. They only had a few months left, just a few more months left of school, and then everything would change. He tried not to think about it, but it was still there, the spectre looming behind every tick of the clock. One day, soon, they would all leave Hogwarts behind. But until that day came, Sirius was determined to hold on, to enjoy meals with his friends, the mornings on the Quidditch pitch and the evenings around the fireplace in the common room. If Marlene hated werewolves that much, if she decided to go to Dumbledore, or threatened to spill Moony's secret to get him kicked out, Sirius would just have to stop her. He wasn't about to let her steal Remus's last few months at Hogwarts. It was approaching dinner time, so Sirius left Remus sleeping in the hospital wing and made his way to the Great Hall. Lily, James, Peter and Mary were already there, smiling and laughing. Clearly they hadn't run into Marlene yet. Sirius slid into his seat and began to shovel food into his mouth quickly, determined to spend as little time as possible eating when there were more important things to do. Merlin, Padfoot, slow down, James laughed, nudging him. Where's the fire? Sirius swallowed, unamused, and muttered, I need to talk to you, all of you. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, and Lily began to ask, What? Sirius shook his head. Not here. The common room. She fell silent, and the entire group remained subdued for the rest of the meal, casting looks at him that were equal parts anxious and curious. The others went on ahead, while he and James took a detour by the hospital wing to drop off some more dinner and the Marauder's map, tucked safely under a pillow, for Remus, who was still sleeping. Once that was done, they hurried back up to Gryffindor Tower. "Finally," Mary complained, once they'd stepped through the portrait door. "Marlene's upstairs, but the door's locked. Pretty sure she's with Yaz. Want me to go and interrupt?" "No," Sirius said quickly, gesturing for her to sit down. He gathered their group around the fire, huddling closer together and casting a quick muffliato to ensure that no one could listen in. Sirius took a breath. Marlene found out. None of his friends needed to ask what he was talking about. James and Peter went pale, Lily's eyebrows shot up, and Mary lifted a hand to her chest, mouth falling open. "Found out!" Lily yelped at the same time as James asked, "How?" and Mary said, "When?" "Remus sent a letter to Danny," Sirius explained, rushing through the words, "because he felt bad and he wanted to help. He didn't say who it was, but Danny wrote back to Marlene this morning, and she's figured it out." "Oh, Remus," Lily breathed, shaking her head. James reached out to take her hand. "She came to the hospital wing this afternoon," Sirius continued, gritting his teeth, to shout at him. "She said all kinds of awful things, accusing him of trying to get Danny to join their side." Mary pressed a hand to her mouth. "Marls wouldn't say that." "God, she knows Remus, they're friends." "Yeah, well, not any more, according to her," Sirius snapped. Mary recoiled, and James frowned at him. "Okay," he said firmly, using his Quidditch captain voice. "Let's all just calm down for a minute. I'm sure Marlene's just upset. Must have been quite a shock, you know, after everything with her brother." "I don't give a shit," Sirius hissed, still fuming. "We can't let her do anything. She keeps calling him dangerous, acting like he shouldn't even be at Hogwarts." Sirius swallowed. Peter was the one who spoke up, saying quietly, "We won't let anything happen." He glanced around the rest of the group. "Right?" They all nodded. Sirius fought back the lump in his throat. "Right," he muttered, half to himself. "Right, yeah, of course." "We'll go talk to her," Lily said, untwisting her fingers from James's. She looked over to Mary, who nodded. The two of them disappeared up the stairs, leaving James, Peter, and Sirius to settle down onto the sofas in front of the fireplace, waiting. They didn't have to wait long. Within 10 minutes both girls came back down, looking shaken and guilty. Sirius raised a brow. "Take it went well," he said sourly. James shot him another warning look, and he bit his tongue. It wasn't Lily and Mary that he was frustrated with. Ignoring his tone, Mary shook her head. "She was really upset," she murmured, sitting down on the sofa next to Peter. "Didn't want to speak to us." Lily sighed, cuddling into James's side as he wrapped an arm around her. "It's Marlene," she said firmly. "She'll come around. She's been friends with Remus since we were all 12. This earned a few half-hearted murmurs of agreement, although Sirius wasn't so sure. Half an hour passed, in which they all attempted to find some way to keep busy. Peter pulled out his chessboard, predictable as ever. Lily roped James into helping her revise for potions, and Mary acquioed a bottle of nail polish and got to work on her manicure. But though everyone tried to act normal, the tension remained hanging over them, heavy and thick, like a storm cloud. So when the portrait door swung open and Remus stepped through, they all turned around immediately. He blinked, then walked towards them, smiling casually. "Moony," Sirius shifted, making room for Remus to sit down. "I was just going to come up and see if you were awake." "I'm awake," he replied easily, a bit stiff as he sat down. "Sirius told us what you did," Peter blurted, fidgeting anxiously with one of the knights from the chessboard. "Good," Remus said, glancing round the circle. Anyone spoken to Marlene?" "We all got yelled at," Mary told him, waving a hand between herself and Lily. "I think she's mostly hurt, that she was the last to find out." She's not said much else, though. Been locked away with Yaz." "Right." "Listen, Moony." James caught his eye, leaning forwards. "We've been talking. You remember 5th year? Dumbledore stopped Snape from telling everyone. He can stop Marlene too, if it comes to that. He might, Remus said slowly, leaning back against the cushions. But leave him out of it for now, okay? Sirius frowned, studying his face. He'd been expecting Remus to be more worked up, now that he was no longer too exhausted to think straight. But if anything, he seemed even more calm, even less perturbed by the idea that Marlene might ruin his final year at Hogwarts. "Why did you do it?" Peter asked, wide-eyed, still twisting the poor chess piece between his fingers. "To help Danny," Remus said, brow furrowed slightly, as though it were obvious. He blinked, staring at each of them in turn, as if he was surprised that they hadn't reached the same conclusion. He was alone. No one was helping him. Marlene told me that herself. "But Remus," Lily hesitated, then said gently, "You knew how she would feel about it. You knew she wouldn't understand." My roommate has just decided that now would be the perfect time to have disco in the shower. So sorry if you can hear that in the background, but I've got to finish this. Where were we? Ooh. Okay, right. Anyway, yeah, sorry if you can hear that in the background, but I'm going to push through. Anyway, you knew she wouldn't understand. I knew that, Remus agreed, but it was for Danny. He made them all promise not to bother Marlene, to let her reach her own decision about what she wanted to do. Lily and Mary still insisted that they would try and talk to her, once she let them back into the dorm, to explain the situation and try to convince her to let it go. Remus thanked them, though he didn't look particularly confident about this idea. The rest of the evening passed by slowly. Sirius was desperate to speak to Remus, but most of the things he wanted to say would be better said in private. He was still churning with emotion, anger and fear and love for the stupid, beautiful boy in front of him, who was losing at chess with Peter so badly that it was almost laughable, who had been willing to risk everything just to help a stranger that he'd never even met. Once Peter had been declared victorious, Sirius nudged over Remus and took a turn playing. He tied, which he supposed was about the best you could hope for with Pete. On the sofa, James and Lily continued to quiz each other about potions' ingredients, and once Mary had finished painting her nails, she charmed her quill to begin filling out job applications. Half-boring Muggle secretarial stuff to please Mum, and half-boring Ministry of Magic stuff to please McGonagall, she explained when Lily asked her about the jobs. By the time they all finally headed up to bed, Sirius was desperate to talk to Remus alone, just to hold him if nothing else. He brushed his teeth and then changed quickly, crawling into bed next to Moony, who was staring silently up at the velvet curtains as they dropped close around them. "I won't let her do this," Sirius curled into his side, twisting their fingers together. "I'll talk to her. Mary and Lily will talk to her, and we'll make her understand. McGonagall and Madame Pomfrey, they all want to help you. She'll listen to them if she won't listen to her friends. Or Dumbledore. James could kick her off the team at anything. We won't lose you, Moony. You've worked too hard. You're not getting kicked out just because you were trying to be nice to that ungrateful, suck-up, intolerant—" "It's going to be okay, Padfoot," Remus said gently, interrupting him. "Exactly!" Sirius whispered back fervently, pressing so close to Remus that his breath ghosted across the other boy's neck. "Exactly, because we're going to stop her." "No, I mean, it doesn't matter what happens. It's going to be okay. I'll leave in 3 months, or if I have to go tomorrow. Everything will still be okay." "What?" "But your newts." "Well, I was looking forward to completely destroying you in history and charms." "And arithmancy. I've been copying off you all year." "And arithmancy," Remus chuckled under his breath. "But, well, the newts don't mean much. I still won't be able to enter any of the ministry training programs without registering as a werewolf, and I'm not going to do that. Not ever. I don't know if I really want to do that sort of job. What I want is to start changing things. That's why I wrote to Danny in the first place." Sirius frowned, trying to process the words. "You mean you want to get kicked out?" "I don't think it will come to that. I don't think Marlene would, even if she's angry. but she might ask me to leave, and if that's what she wants, then I will. And join the war, Sirius said, realising what Remus was getting at. He wasn't sure why the words felt hollow, why they dropped off his tongue like stones. As if you're not planning to run off and enlist in Dumbledore's little army the second you're out of school. Yeah, I suppose you could put it that way. Sirius squeezed his hand, resolve hardening as he whispered, I'll come with you then. I don't need newts either. I'm a black. I wouldn't ask you to do that. I know, but I will. We'll go together. After all, wasn't that the most important thing? They had already been through so much heartache, so much pain. Nothing had separated them yet. Sirius would be damned if he let something as silly as newts challenge that. Remus was right. It wasn't as if exams would matter once they were actually fighting, once they were actually working to make the world a better place. No matter what life threw at them, they would stick together. Sirius was sure, down to his bones, that nothing could ever change that. Remus rolled over to face him, eyes glowing, lit from within. Thank you, he whispered, feverishly, passionately, crushing their lips together. Thank you. Anything, Sirius thought, as Remus's mouth moved along his neck. His hand slipped under his shirt. I'd do anything for you, Moony. All the Young Dudes. Sirius's Perspective by Rollercoaster Words. Chapter 145. 7th Year. What We Lack. Wednesday the 29th of March, 1978. Quidditch practice that weekend was dire. Marlene showed up, same as usual, and ran through all the drills with her typical dedicated concentration, but she didn't say a word to James or Sirius. She hardly even spoke to Yaz, who shrugged apologetically at the two of them once practice was over and hurried off to the locker rooms after her girlfriend. The drills went fairly well, but Sirius could tell that James was worried. How were they supposed to come together as a team and win the Quidditch Cup if the two beaters wouldn't so much as look in each other's direction? Still, he didn't say anything, wisely electing to give Marlene space. Sirius, on the other hand, didn't try to hide his anger, slamming his locker door and grumbling as they changed out of their Quidditch kits. She's a bloody bigot is what she is, he muttered darkly, drying his hair from the shower. We're better off without her if that's the way she's going to act. James shot him a look. Come on, Pads. I'm just as upset as you are, but she's going through a really difficult time. She's not a bad person. We're all going through a bloody difficult time, Sirius frowned, yanking on his shirt. It's not as if she's the only one whose family has been affected by the war. No, but she's the only one of us whose brother has got attacked by a werewolf. And my brother's a bloody Death Eater, Sirius snapped. Boo-hoo! Sometimes shit happens. Doesn't mean she gets to take it out on Remus. James blinked. Padfoot, he said carefully. I get what you're saying. I do. But things with Regulus, well, that's just not the same as what Marlene's got going on. What's that supposed to mean? James ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. Marlene's brother didn't choose to become a werewolf, Sirius. Someone else forced it on him. Sirius faltered, fumbling with the buttons. The only real difference between you and me, Sirius, is that you got a choice. After a moment, he shook his head. I'm not, he finished buttoning his shirt, frowning. I'm not trying to say it's the same. I'm just saying that whatever she's got going on, it's not an excuse for making Remus feel like shit. I know, James said quietly. It's not an excuse, just an explanation. It's not like she's intending to be cruel. Sirius snorted. Does that matter? I think it does. They were quiet for a bit, pulling on robes and sorting out their brooms. They headed back towards the castle, and Sirius found himself asking, Why? Why do you think it matters? He clarified. Whether Marlene intends it or not. She'll still be saying all the same things as people who do mean to be cruel, and if anything it hurts him more, because she's supposed to be his friend. James frowned, thinking. Well, he said slowly, because if she doesn't intend to hurt him, that means she still cares about him, doesn't she? And if she cares enough, then I think eventually she'll start to change her mind. Sirius grunted. Suppose. James eyed him, smiling dryly. Really, Padfoot. He shook his head. It's not as if we've always been perfect either. I mean, think about some of the bollocks you used to say back in first year. Or second year. Merlin, think about some of the bollocks I used to say, mate. If you've been taught to think one way your whole life, it's not very realistic to expect to complete 180 overnight. You should understand that better than anyone. Sirius bristled. Why? Because I'm not a fucking Death Eater like the rest of my blood supremacist family? Yeah, James said steadily. That's exactly why. You know what it's like to try and undo the sort of thinking that your parents taught you. So just give Marlene a chance before you write her off completely, yeah? Sirius scowled, unable to think of a response. What James was saying made sense. He knew that. He knew that he'd hurt Remus before, knew he'd said cruel things without meaning to. Sirius's friends had always been patient with him, more patient than he deserved. He knew all of that, the same way he knew that James was probably right about Marlene deserving a chance to do the right thing. He was still angry with her, though. The rest of the weekend passed quietly, without a move in either direction from Marlene. She mostly just avoided them, hiding away with Yasmin in the library or in one of their dorm rooms. That suited Sirius just fine. Remus seemed to relax a bit more when she wasn't around. Though he remained quiet and tense throughout the beginning of the week, falling frequently into his familiar brooding silences. It was partially an effort to distract Remus from the whole mess with Marlene, partially to console James, who was still grumpy about having to wait until Wednesday for the inter-house Co-Operative Prank-Planning Meeting, and partially because they all thought it would be funny that the Marauders spent Monday and Tuesday evening conducting research on a separate prank, something small, to blow off some steam. It had already been set into motion the previous week, mostly by Remus, who spent hours scouring textbooks about troll history to search for portraits. James and Sirius worked to tweak the spell they'd used for the Red Wing portrait charm in the previous year, and Peter, well, he mostly just played lookout, but that was still helpful. Unfortunately, Remus wasn't able to actually join in on the implementation of the prank. He insisted that he had to run his study club. James grudgingly offered to wait until later in the week, but Mooney waved them ahead, assuring them that he wanted to see the results of all their research sooner rather than later. And that was how, on the afternoon just before their inter-house cooperative meeting, Sirius, James and Peter found themselves sneaking through the castle, in and out of bathrooms, whispering spells over every mirror. By the time they had finished, they were already seeing the fruits of their labour. As they made their way down to the charms classrooms for their meeting, terrified shrieks could be heard coming from the girls' loos. The three boys paused, listening to the horrifying explanations, and promptly burst into laughter. Unfortunately, Lily was not so amused. "I cannot believe you, Potter!" she fumed, storming down the hallway. "We agreed! I told you! How many times?" She slammed the door to the charms classroom open, stomping inside. James, Sirius and Peter followed her, all biting back smiles. "We said no pranks until the end of term. We're supposed to be keeping a low profile. Your head boy!" "Come on, Evans." James gave her his most charming smile. "That was nothing. Barely even a prank. It was, He glanced at Sirius, obviously in need of assistance. "High spirits," Sirius suggested. James nodded fervently. "High spirits?" "All of the bathroom mirrors suddenly reflecting back troll faces is high spirits?" Lily demanded, folding her arms and giving them a stern look that was eerily reminiscent of McGonagall. Sirius began to laugh again, helplessly, and soon he and James were clutching each other's shoulders for support, wiping tears from their eyes. Suddenly, a quiet voice from the corner interrupted them. "You're nutters." "Marlene!" Lily whipped around, shocked. All three boys turned too, staring at the blonde girl as she straightened up from where she'd been leaning against the wall. Sirius turned to look at Remus, wondering what had happened. Did this mean Marlene had made a decision, then? Remus smiled at them, entirely at ease. He had one hip leaning against Flitwick's desk, and he straightened up too, clapping his hands together briskly. Come on then, this cooperative isn't going to run itself. Apparently, Marlene had decided to try and accept Remus, whatever that meant. Sirius was still wary, but according to Mooney, she had made it clear that she wasn't going to tell anyone his secret, and she wanted him to stay at Hogwarts, which, Sirius supposed, was the best-case scenario, and Remus seemed to forgive and forget, waving Sirius off when he grumbled about the way Marlene had talked to him. She apologised, he said, firmly, any time Sirius began to complain about it, and I forgave her. It's all fine, Padfoot. Please, just drop it. So Sirius held his tongue. Later that night, he lay in bed, watching Remus crumple up pieces of parchment and restart the same sentence over and over as he tried to compose a letter to Danny McKinnon. It was getting late, but he wasn't giving up, determined to introduce himself properly. Sirius yawned, watching Remus huff in annoyance. He asked, "What do you want to talk to him for, though? You know more about being a werewolf than he does. It's not as if he'll have any special insight." Remus yawned too, finally giving up and levitating his parchment and quill off the bed. "It's not really about that," he said, lying down next to Sirius, absent-mindedly rubbing his knuckles. The boy spent so much time with the quill in his hands that Sirius was surprised his fingers hadn't permanently twisted into a new shape. "Wait until school's finished then," Sirius urged. "Safer for you both." Now that things were finally stable with Marlene, he didn't see any reason to tempt fate. What if someone somehow found out Remus was writing to Danny McKinnon and managed to put two and two together? "There are 3 moons between now and then," Remus said, a bit irritably, shifting around in the sheets. Sirius frowned. "I know that," he replied, a bit more sharply than he meant to. "But there's not much you can do, is there?" "I suppose not." "And you don't owe him anything." "No," Remus said slowly, "but I owe it to myself to do the right thing, don't I?" Right thing for who? Sirius wanted to ask. Instead, he heard himself saying, "Is that what you got into your head?" He knew it was a bit patronising, but honestly, it wasn't as if Remus would be helping anyone if he got himself kicked out of school, or worse, forced to sign the registry. Who was to say that the Ministry wouldn't somehow find out, that they were monitoring the post of all the werewolves from the attack? Peter kept talking about how there were spies everywhere, according to his cousin who worked at the Prophet. Remus went stiff. "What do you mean, what I got into my head?" "When you wrote to Danny in the first place. You've got to admit it was a bit reckless." "Excuse me?" "Well, for someone who spent years trying to keep every aspect of himself completely private, it was a bit bonkers to just go and send a letter to a stranger, my friend's brother, spilling your guts out about everything, not everything, but if it was all in the service of doing what you think is the right thing, then I suppose that's fine." "Look, if you're pissed off with me, then just say so. This sarcastic crap doesn't suit you, Black," Remus snapped, rolling onto his side. "I'm not pissed off," Sirius replied automatically. "Good." Okay, maybe he was a little bit pissed off. Sirius took a breath, forcing himself to calm down. He didn't want to be angry with Remus. It was just easier than feeling everything else that lay underneath. "I've been thinking, that's all," he said, deflating slightly. Remus rolled back over to face him, eyes hard and wary. "What?" "It's like you want to leave, or something." "Leave me," he didn't say. "Obviously I want to leave." Remus scowled, expression growing stormy. "I told you, it's pointless, me doing newts, pissing about with silly exams and clubs and pranks, when things are happening out there, right now. I had a chance to help, and I took it. So what if I didn't care about the consequences, calling me reckless? I thought you'd understand. What happened to wanting to get back at your family? What happened to wanting to put a stop to it?" "I don't want to," Sirius protested, shrinking back. "Well, you're not acting like it. You seem more fussed about stupid Quidditch match than the war. Maybe they're the same thing to you." "Merlin!" Sirius released a breath, trying to feel less like he'd been punched in the gut. "You don't stop until you've tasted blood, do you?" "Must be the wolf in me," Remus said coldly. He rolled over and didn't turn back again. Chapter 146. 7th Year. Apologies. Saturday the 1st of April, 1978. No Remus today. Lily smiled up at him, squinting slightly against the afternoon sunshine. Sirius opened his mouth to reply, but James got there first, jogging to catch up and slinging an arm around Sirius's shoulders. Nah, they're still fighting. Sirius shrugged him off, scowling. We're not fighting, he grumbled, shoving his hands in his pockets. He's just gone to make a phone call. To who? Lily asked, politely ignoring his sour tone. His mum? No, Sirius muttered. His friend. Grant. Sirius's scowl deepened. James and Lily exchanged a look, which Sirius pretended not to see. After a moment, Lily said, Well, I suppose he'll be joining us after. Sirius didn't respond, only grunted and shrugged, scuffing at the ground with his shoe. Lily gave James another pointed look, but finally let the subject drop. She and Prongs chatted quietly for the rest of the walk to Hogsmeade, with Sirius only half listening, still feeling grumpy and irritable. He and Remus weren't fighting. In fact, they were hardly even speaking. Sirius was fed up with getting snapped at, and had resolved to just remain aloof until Mooney apologised. The problem with this strategy was that Remus had also seemingly decided to remain aloof, and the result was a lot of very pointed ignoring each other and passive-aggressive comments across the dinner table. They were still sleeping in the same bed, which Sirius was secretly very grateful for. He'd grown used to the warm weight of Mooney beside him, and it no longer felt right to sleep alone. But they didn't talk, and they didn't touch, and in the mornings Remus would inevitably elbow him as he tried to untangle his limbs from the sheets, causing Sirius to wake up and glare spitefully at the other boy as he stumbled into the bathroom to brush his teeth. All in all, it had not been a very good end to the week. Sirius cheered up marginally once they reached the Three Broomsticks, where Peter, Mary, Yaz and Marlene had already claimed a corner booth. James stopped by the bar to grab 3 more butterbeers, and Sirius and Lily slid into their seats. After a bit of shifting around so that the couples could sit together, Sirius ended up squashed between Peter and Mary, who promptly stole a sip of his butterbeer. Her own glass was empty. Right then, she said, smacking her lips and ignoring the dirty look that Sirius shot her. What's the plan for today? Homework, Lily groaned, slumping. I've still got to start that potions essay for Slughorn. I haven't had time yet. I meant for Hogsmeade, Lily, but thanks for reminding me about that. Mary raised Sirius's glass in a sarcastic toast, and Lily rolled her eyes. Well, you didn't clarify. I need to go to Scrivenshafts, but that's really it. Oh, and Potter and I need to gather all the prefects once it's time to go back, so we'll have to leave a bit early. Ugh, boring. Marls? Yaz and I need to pop over to the Quidditch Emporium at some point, but there's no rush. So my options are third wheeling while shopping for stationery, or third wheeling while shopping for broom supplies. Lovely. Marlene laughed, and Yaz smiled wryly, shaking her head. Their relationship was another new development in the group. At least, it was new for half of the group. Lily hadn't seemed at all surprised when Marlene finally came clean and admitted that Yasmin was her girlfriend, but James and Peter had clearly been caught off guard. Once they were back upstairs in their dorm, Peter had scratched his head and asked, Blimey, is everybody bent now? This had resulted in a stern talking to from James, the effectiveness of which was undermined somewhat by Sirius and Remus hysterically laughing in the background. I need new gloves. I'll tag along to the Quidditch Emporium, Sirius said, snatching his half-drunk butterbeer away from Mary's greedy hands. Nobody has anything more interesting going on, she sighed heavily. When's our next big prank meeting? Not till Wednesday, James told her, grinning. But there is something else we need to plan, if you want to get that started. Oh, go on then, what is it? He leaned forward, elbows nudging aside his glass on the table. Our end-of-year party, of course. Mary's eyes lit up. Yes! She clapped her hands together, excited. What have you got in mind, Potter? Well, I may have already asked my parents if we could host. And? James smirked smugly. They said yes, of course. Yes! Mary cheered. Bless your family in their disgustingly huge mansion. Oh, I'm so bloody excited. You cannot put Remus in charge of the music again, though, or I will mutiny. This made everyone at the table laugh, and in a fit of excitement, Mary hopped out of her seat and returned with another tray full of butterbeers. To the greatest end-of-year party that Hogwarts has ever seen, she said, raising her glass. The rest of them followed suit, smiling and grinning, and Sirius felt his earlier frustration melting away when they began to discuss their plans for the party, who to invite, what music to play, what drinks to provide. By the time they were getting up to fetch a third round of butterbeer, Sirius was feeling very cheerful, and he smiled widely at Rosmerta as he ordered. There you are, love. She passed him the tray. Ta, darling. He winked at her playfully, and the pretty bartender rolled her eyes and suppressed a smile, shooing him away with the dish rag. Sirius made his way carefully back over to the table, balancing the heavy tray of drinks on one arm. Right, come and get him. He looked over, grinning, and froze. Remus was there, sitting in what had previously been Sirius's seat. There was now only a sliver of room left on the edge of the bench. Sirius swallowed, gut churning, unsure of what to say. All their friends glanced away awkwardly, as if they could sense the tension between the two. Sirius supposed that they hadn't exactly been subtle about whatever was going on between them. It was a relief when Remus spoke first. Hiya, he said casually, tilting his chin down so that some of his curls fell into his face. They were getting long and a bit floppy. Sirius adored it. But he was trying not to think about that right now. Hi, he responded, trying to match Remus's casual tone. Were they acting normal? Was that what they were doing now? Would they talk and laugh with their friends and then go back to ignoring each other, to falling asleep side by side without ever even touching? I'll go back and get you. Remus can have mine, Mary interrupted, getting to her feet. Samuel from my charms group has been throwing me looks all afternoon. Have my seat, Black. She gave him a little push, urging him to sit down, and Sirius, seeing no other option, complied. See you later, Mary sang, hips swaying as she strolled over to a group of Ravenclaw boys sitting at a table on the other end of the pub. Marlene smirked over at Yaz, who laughed and twisted their fingers together on top of the table. The public display of affection drove Remus to glance anxiously about the bar, as if trying to ensure that no one had noticed. But there was no need to worry. Marlean and Yasmin had selected this booth for a reason. It was so poorly lit, and mostly concealed from the rest of the pub, meaning they wouldn't need to worry about getting caught. James and Lily were taking advantage of this fact too. She was sitting practically on top of him, and he was sneaking a hand up her shirt. How was the call? Sirius asked politely, staring down at his beer. Good. Remus angled towards him slightly. He sounded really well. Happy. That's nice. Sirius wasn't sure what else to say. Down the table, Peter was engaged in a conversation about Quidditch with Marlean and Yaz, but it would probably be rude to lean over Remus and talk to them, and James and Lily weren't exactly the world's greatest conversationalists at that moment. They appeared to be having some sort of lovesick staring contest, smiling dopily as they gazed into each other's eyes. Next to him, Remus gulped his beer. Sirius fiddled with his own glass, wondering if he should try and say something else, but his mind had gone blank. Fortunately, Remus broke the silence first, twisting sideways to face him, and he said quietly, I'm such a prick. Well, that wasn't what he'd expected. Sirius wondered if Grant had said something to make Remus change his tune. He wasn't sure whether he thought that should make him happy or even more irritated. Yep, he replied, settling on irritation, taking a swig of his drink to hide the smile that twitched in the corner of his lips. Remus scooted closer, so that his knee was pressing into Sirius's thigh. I'm sorry, he whispered, breath warm against Sirius's ear. I can't talk to you about anything sometimes, without you biting my head off," Sirius muttered, trying not to get distracted by how close Remus was sitting. "You get into these moods, and I can't reach you." "I know," Remus murmured, that warm breath again, fluttering over Sirius's neck. He suppressed a shiver. Remus was actually trying to apologise for once. It definitely wasn't the time to be getting distracted by his own filthy mind. If only Moony wasn't so warm, or didn't smell so good. Suddenly, Remus's fingers were brushing against Sirius's jaw, pushing his hair back behind his ear. Before Sirius could ask what he was doing, the poor boy leaned in, quickly, pressing his lips against the pulse point of Sirius's neck, flicking his tongue out for just a moment before pulling back. Sirius couldn't help himself. He nearly gasped, sucking in a sharp breath of air as the heat from Remus's mouth jolted straight through his body like lightning. His heart shuddered and began to pound frantically in his chest. "I'm really sorry," Remus was murmuring, still close enough that his breath fanned out over Sirius's neck. "It's my fault, and I'll do better." Sirius tried desperately to concentrate, though half of his brain had just turned to mush. "Better?" "Better. I'm sorry. I lose my temper when people tell me what to do, but I'm going to try." Sirius turned towards him, and Remus pulled back slightly so that their eyes met. Those fucking eyes, just as warm as the rest of him, deep brown with those mesmerising flecks of gold. "Suppose it's not really my job to tell you what to do in the first place," Sirius breathed, all anger forgotten. It was impossible to stay mad with Remus looking at him like that, earnest and searching and penitent. Sirius just wanted him to lean in again, to keep kissing his neck, to run those long fingers up his thigh under the table. "No, but I don't have to be such a dick about it," Remus replied, scooting even further back, stretching out a hand for his drink. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." "Oh yeah," Remus smirked coyly, raising an eyebrow. He could think of quite a few ways in which he'd like Remus to make it up to him, and it was becoming very difficult to concentrate on anything else. "Later," Remus rolled his eyes, slapping Sirius's thigh playfully. He stifled a groan. Marlean, this was pathetic. 3 days without touching, and suddenly the barest hint of contact had him ready to jump Remus in the middle of the pub. He forced himself to relax back into his seat, putting more space between them. "So, what did Grant say?" "Oh, we just caught up," Remus shrugged. "He's still working in Brighton. He has his own flat. Wants to get a car for the weekends." "We should go there, after school is finished," Sirius offered. "If you wanted. If there's time for a holiday." "Maybe," Remus agreed, taking another swig of his beer. Sirius supposed that was the best answer any of them could give. Right now, everything after Hogwarts was just one gigantic maybe. "So, I told him I'd hex his bollocks off if he asked me one more time," Yaz was saying across the table, sending Marlene into a fit of giggles. "You're awful." "Well, he needs to learn his lesson." "Who?" Sirius asked, at the exact same time as James. They both leaned forwards, mirroring each other's posture. "Ugh, Lockhart," Yasmin grimaced, tossing her hair. "Is he bothering you lot again?" James frowned, falling immediately into Quidditch captain mode. "I told him to stay away from my team. I'll tell Flitwick." "Don't worry, he got the message this time," Marlene interrupted, laughing. "Yaz is quite convincing." "What does he want?" Sirius took a sip of his beer, eager to get back into the gossip. "He just keeps sniffing around, trying to find out what we're up to," James said. "Reckons he's being left out. He's like a bit more of a hygiene-conscious version of Snape in 5th year. Lily tutted and elbowed him sharply, but James only laughed. "Left out of what?" Remus wrinkled his brow. "He doesn't even play, and he's a Ravenclaw. They lost the last game." "Moony," Sirius grinned at him. "Did you just demonstrate Quidditch knowledge?" This made everyone laugh, except Remus, who tried to hide his smile behind a glass of beer. "Hard to avoid it in our bloody dorm," he grumbled, mock-offended. "Anyway, it's not the Quidditch team he's interested in." James got back to the matter at hand. "It's the other thing." He lowered his voice ominously, glancing around as if to look for spies. Sirius shook his head, smiling fondly. It was very clear to everyone at the table that Prongs was referring to the prank. "He hasn't asked me," Remus said, unperturbed. "That's because you've got everyone fooled," Marlene teased, smiling. "The whole school somehow thinks you're the mild one out of us lot." A slow smile crept across Remus's face. "Are you suggesting I'm not?" He smirked, raising an eyebrow. "And oh, Merlin," Sirius thought, "I am weak. I am so very weak." A small strangled noise slipped from the back of his throat. He chugged his drink hastily, hoping that no one had heard. "Right." Lily knocked back the last of her beer, wiping her lips on her sleeve as she stood. "We've got 2 hours before we've got to start herding the prefects back, and I really need to go to Scrivenshafts before it closes. Potter?" "Yep, coming." He hopped up, draining what was left of his own pint. "We both need broom polish if you want to come, Pete," Marlene offered, smiling as she slid out from the bench. "Great," he chirped, shooting her a somewhat relieved smile as he clambered out after her. "Black?" Marlene turned back to him. "Do you want new gloves?" "I'll just order them from Quidditch Monthly," he told her, too distracted to look up. Remus was licking a drop of beer from the corner of his mouth, pink tongue darting out from behind his lips. "Suit yourself," Marlene said easily. The next several minutes were spent rummaging around the booth to ensure no one had forgotten anything, then shoving back and forth to the bar to settle the tab. Finally, the group dispersed, waving goodbye as they headed to the door and leaving Remus and Sirius alone in their private corner. Remus turned to him, smiling angelically. "What do you fancy doing then? Walk? Honeydukes?" "When the dorm room is guaranteed to be empty for at least 2 hours," Sirius scoffed, raising a brow. He had an entire list ready of things that he'd fancy doing, but none of them were Hogsmeade appropriate. "More like an hour and a half by the time we get up there," Remus said coyly. "Better get a move on then." "Oi," Remus stood smirking, curls flopping into his face. "I thought I told you I don't like being told what to do." He held the door open as they walked out of the pub, and Sirius brushed past him, turning and leaning forward just enough to whisper, "You'll just have to tell me what to do then." Mooney's eyes flashed, and the smirk went from coy to positively sinful. Merlin, Sirius thought as they hurried back to Gryffindor Tower. Why was I ever mad at him?